Greetings, brothers and sisters of the Discalced Carmelite Secular Order, and to all of those who are listening to these videos for whatever reason, for interest in the secular order for yourself, or as a spouse of a member of the secular order, or a friar who wants to know more about the assistance through means of supporting and understanding the constitutions. That is what we are doing. We're looking at the constitutions. Why am I doing this? Why am I making these videos? Since I was responsible for putting the constitutions together, I speak with some autorevolezza, they say in Italian. So I speak with some authority about why the constitutions say what they say, and what it means for implementing the constitutions, for applying them. One thing is to know the law, another thing is to apply the law. Because in the application, especially we'll be getting into some things when we talk about community, in the application of the law, individual circumstances have to be taken into consideration. These constitutions are written for the whole church throughout the world, for the whole order throughout the world, for the whole secular order throughout the world. And there are some places where the secular order members are very educated, well enough educated, people who have degrees and people who have professions, and there are other places where the members of the secular order are simple people who've had not quite as much education. In some places, in some cases, the members are not able to read themselves, so the whole application of the law, the whole application of a formation program has to take into consideration the individual circumstances of the member of the community. So there's never in the law, there's never one application that fits all. The law is the same for everybody, but its application makes a huge difference. So you can expect from some people some things, and your expectations of other people is different. So what we're doing here is trying to understand what the constitutions say, and more importantly, or equally importantly, why they say what they say. And this is especially, I explained that this part of on the community 3B, and this part on community is born of the experience of the application of the new constitutions, which were 20 years this year. 2003, this is 2023, and it was in June of 2003 that the constitutions were approved. But yet at a certain point in time, it was necessary to amend these constitutions, specifically with regard to how the community functions. And as we saw in 24A, the application and explanation of, you might say, the theology of Pope St. John Paul II in his theology of communion, and therefore applying the theology of communion to the community. And so it was an explanation of why do we call our group community? Because of the church's theology of communion. The 24B was appealing to our Carmelite doctors, our father and mother, as we say in the order of our Holy Father, our Holy Mother, St. Teresa of Jesus, our Holy Mother, St. John of the Cross, our Holy Father, how they understood the necessity for relationship, a value of importance, of prayer together, of support and prayer together, which is what community is intended to be. Now 24C, which we'll start today, 24C is an explanation of the individual person as a member of the community. So I'll read 24C. As you see, these parts of the Constitution are well documented with footnotes to understand. So 24C. A person loyal to their Christian faith begins to be part of the secular order through the promise made to the community before the superior of the order. With the promise, a person is committed to live in communion with the church, with the order, with the province, and especially committed to live with those who are part of the community, loving them and encouraging them in the practice of the virtues. In smaller communities, it is possible to establish a true and deep relationship of human and spiritual friendship, as well as mutual support in charity and humility. That's the first paragraph. Second paragraph. Saint Teresa appreciates the assistance of another in the spiritual life. Love grows where there is respectful dialogue, the purpose of which is to know oneself better, so as to be pleasing to God. Community meetings take place in a congenial atmosphere of dialogue and sharing. Prayer, formation, and a joyful atmosphere are essential for deepening friendly relationships and enduring for everyone mutual support in the daily living out of the Teresian Carmelite lay vocation in the family, at work, and in other social situations. This requires regular and active participation in the life and the meetings of the community. Absences are only allowed for serious and just reasons, evaluated and agreed to with those in charge. The provincial statutes are to establish a limit on unjustifiable absences, beyond which an individual will be considered inactive and liable for dismissal from the community. Now let's focus on the different aspects of this number 24C. A person loyal to their Christian faith. There's something here. The secular order is part of the religious order. It's part of the religious family of the Discalced Carmelite order. To be a member of the Discalced Carmelites, one must be, it says Christian faith, but the understanding in writing of this is that to be a member of the secular order, one must be a practicing Catholic. We've talked about this before, very early in the early part of these videos that I've been making. One must be a practicing member of the church. So it is a person loyal to their Christian faith. We might say loyal to their Christian Catholic faith. Begins to be part of the secular order through the promise made to the community before the superior of the order. The promise is made to the community. So the community is a visible part of the presence of the order. The order is present in the community. The member is a member of the community, therefore a member of the order. And the order is part of the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church. So the person begins to be part of the secular order through the promise, by means of the promise. And it's important to understand that the promise is made to the community. A vow is made to God directly by means of the church. The promise, by which you become a member of the order, the promise is made to the order. And the order is represented in the province, but most specifically present in the community. So each member who becomes a member, even those who are long distance members, are still members because they are identified with a community of persons. With the promise, a person is committed to live in communion with the church, with the order, with the province, and especially with those who are part of the community, loving them and encouraging them in the practice of the virtues. There's a reason for our fraternity. There's a reason for our being members of community. And being members is beyond the question of just a social club. The community is not a social club because the community has a purpose. The community of the church has for its primary purpose the worship and adoration of God. Secondly, or thirdly, or fourthly, the community has a social, the church has a social implication, a social appreciation. Our friendship, our human friendship with each other, which is necessary, is not the primary reason for the community. With the promise, a person is committed to live. That's the second time we just put this in in the Rule of St. Albert. It's constantly underlining that Carmelite life is a way of living. It's not a way of praying. It's not a way of being a hermit. It's a way of living. So with a promise, a person committed to live in communion with the church. This is the most important element, the basic element on which we can stand on sure ground, on steady ground, on solid ground. The faith of the Roman Catholic Church, to be a member of the Roman Catholic Church, to live in communion with the church. To live in communion with the church is to accept the church's teaching and to accept the church's discipline. The discipline of the church, or the discipline of the order, or the discipline of the community is the school of discipleship, discipline, disciple. They come from the same word. I mean, teaching, teachable, being able to be taught, wanting to be taught. There are people, in the Spanish they say, saberlo todo. People who know everything. Well, if you already know everything, there's nothing you need to learn. You don't need to be a member of the secular order. We are, all of us, always trying to know more. We study. We study the teachings of the church. I've said before, the necessary library for a member of the secular order, or a member of the order, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, no matter what place in the church, a member of the Discalced Carmelite order ought to have a Bible, of course. They ought to have the writings of St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross. Because they are books that are constantly referred to. Similar to the way we refer constantly to the Bible. We have our own copies of the books, not just, because you can't just read The Way of Perfection one time and, oh, I read that. Maybe if you're a Franciscan, you can say that. Maybe if you're a third order Augustinian, you can say that. Maybe if you're an associate of some religious community, you can say, oh, I read that one time. We constantly need to refer to this, to our saints, to to understand ourselves as members of the order. So we're committed to live in communion with the church and with the order. To live in communion with the church and with the order, with the province, and especially with those who are part of the community. Loving them and encouraging them in the practice of the virtues. The practice of the virtues is important. Understand that phrase, the practice of the virtues. The virtues are the proof that you have a prayer life. The proof of your prayer life is not in how long you can spend meditating. That's not the proof. The proof of your prayer life is not that you're able to kneel for an hour with your arms outstretched. The practice of the prayer life is not known by how good you feel after your period of prayer. You feel yourself so in touch with God. I can remember as a novice, I was a novice at Holy Hill in Wisconsin. And it was August, the month was August. I had entered the novitiate at the end of the last day of April, the 30th of April. This was in August. And the choir that looked out over the church in the Holy Hill, the choir was on the 6th floor. The dining room was on the 2nd floor. And I remember this August afternoon, we had mental prayer from 5 to 6. And when the prayer was over, I was so impressed with myself. I thought, oh, wow, that was wonderful. And we walked down in silence. And we walked down the 4 flights of steps from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor. And we went into the dining room. And the dinner was there present on a table where we each went up and took what was ours. And I forget the exact number, but there was a piece of cake there cut into places, put on a plate, and everyone took a plate. And I was the last one in line. Or at least it seemed I was the last one in line, because when I got there, the brother in front of me took the last piece of cake. It upset me that there was no cake. There was no cake. I was only a kid. I was only a youngster. That brother, he didn't think of me. He didn't think of somebody else. He thought only of himself. He took that piece of cake. And now there's no cake for me or for anybody else who was behind me. I forget who was behind me. And I remember going to my novice minister for a weekly conference. That was on a Saturday, and I had my weekly conference on a Wednesday morning. And I went for a meeting with the novice minister. And I explained to him how I had this wonderful experience of prayer and how this brother ruined my prayer. And my novice minister said to me, what do you think was the proof of your prayer? How you felt or how you acted? And that taught me that it's how one acts, how one lives, that proves the value and the depth of the prayer. So the practice of the virtues, patience, tolerance, charity, fortitude, prudence, the whole mixture of the virtues. The importance of studying the virtues is to know how to act. What does prudent mean? What does it mean to practice the virtue of fortitude, justice, humility? So all of these are important questions Because that's how we look at our lives. That's what we examine ourselves on. We don't examine ourselves on our feelings, how I feel about prayer, how I feel about my hour of prayer, or how I feel about having finished the office, the divine office. We examine our lives. How tolerant are we of the other members of the community? Not just how tolerant are we of our friends. We can be very tolerant of our friends because they basically think the way we think. But how tolerant are we of those who do not think the way we think? This is the This is universal equation. How do I act? This is for superiors, it's for inferiors. There's nobody who's inferior, but we use the word superior to talk about people who are the bosses. Whether we're the boss or the bossed. Whether one of those who bosses or one of those who are bossed. This practice is for the same. It's for the leaders of the community to examine themselves in their leadership. How do they treat the members of the community? We're called together to learn how to be with God. And we're called together to help each other. How do we help each other? With the promise, a person is committed to live in communion, especially with those who are part of the community, loving them and encouraging them in the practice of the virtues. Our first mode of encouragement is practicing the virtues ourselves. That's the first mode of the way we encourage others. We speak from the experience of practicing those virtues. I've referred before to an excellent encyclopedia on the internet, newadvent.com. New Advent, one word, the newadvent.com. There's an encyclopedia, and you can look up the virtues. Look up the virtue of justice. Look up the virtue of prudence. Look up the virtue of fortitude. Look up the virtue of humility. Read what it is. And examine yourselves on that. In smaller communities, it is possible to establish a true and deep relationship of human and spiritual friendship, as well as mutual support in charity and humility. I don't think there is any saint who has written something, whether it's their own personal journal, like St. Teresa of the Child Jesus, whether it's an explanation of the spirituality, whether it's St. Teresa or St. John of the Cross. I don't think there's any saint who has not written about the importance of the virtue of humility. St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross, but St. Teresa especially. Without humility, everything's lost. This applies to presidents of community. It also applies to members of the community. So the counselor, the formation director, the one who gives classes, must be aware of the necessity to practice the virtue of humility. But in smaller communities, it's possible. In smaller communities, it depends on the geography. But personally, this is my own personal opinion, I believe that when membership gets to be close to 60, it's time to divide the community, because if not, the community will naturally divide into factions or sections, older and younger. People who've been there for 30 years and people who've been there for 2 weeks. I think there's a point, and for me the point is 60, when there should be the time to take up the question with the provincial delegate as to the membership in the community. Now, community, there's all sorts of ways in which a community can have 60 members. You can have 60 members, 10 or 15 of whom do not participate in the meetings. Generally, I mean 60 people who are attending meetings. I remember one time when I was very early in Rome, and I went to visit a certain province that had one community of 500 people. One community with 500 people, members of it, practicing members of it. And you could be a member of the community and not know 45% of the people. You can 55, 60% not know who they are and even their names. And to me, it just seemed impossible. I convinced them to establish from the 500 people to establish 9 communities, separate them into 9 communities with 9 different. They had rented a Protestant church that was empty, and they were renting it as a place where they could have their meetings, because they couldn't have their meetings in a meeting room. They needed a church to have their meetings. They were wonderful people, and they were very kind, very charitable. But the danger of a community that's too large is you separate by friendships, not by brotherhood or sisterhood. If the community is too large, well, you have your friends and you get along with your friends. And the ones that you don't like, you don't have to worry about them. It's important to have to worry about people you do not like. That's important. Because that's where virtue comes from. If it's somebody that you do not like, it's somebody that's in the community, that's the challenge of practicing the virtues. So it's better to have smaller communities. I think when we start a new community, there's a certain number that's required. And then the number, there's 10 members to start a new community. But hopefully that will grow, and the 20, 30, 40, 50 members, that's a good-sized community. I also remember another community that I visited very early in another country, where the membership was 6 people, 6 elderly people, 6 people who were in their 70s and 80s. And they met on Thursday afternoons at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They met at that time because it was possible for them to be at the meetings, to attend the meetings. But if you have your meetings at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, people who work cannot participate in the community. People who have jobs or have families, mothers who have families, have children at home. Their children, the meetings at 2 o'clock, the children get home from school at 3 or 3:30 or 4 o'clock. Mother, if she's not working, should be there. So we have to look at the size of the community. And we have to look at the possibilities for relationships that exist in the communities. I remember telling a community of nuns one time, they had not had a new vocation in 25 years. And I said to the sisters, sisters, if If a young person comes here, they're not going to find a sister. They're going to find a mother or a grandmother, but not a sister. It's important for us to take care of the number of people in the community and to be able to look for new vocations. To be able to, what's attractive to a community, what attracts people to want to be members of the community? The way the community relates, not the way the community prays, the way the community members relate to each other. I remember receiving a letter one time from a secular order member who was, I guess she was in the first year of temporary vows. So she had been an aspirant, an apostulant, and a novice. But then she said during the first year that she was in temporary vows, she was so scandalized by the way members of the community gossiped about other members of the community that she said to me, "This is what I have to deal with at work 5 days of the week. I don't need to deal with it on Sunday too." And for that reason, she's stopped being a member. She's separated from the community. Relationships with each other. This is the reason. This is how we make communion, through relationships. Through relationships, not just with our friends. Through relationship with our brothers and sisters, who God calls us to live together. So in the next video, we'll look at the second part of the 24C. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for participating in these videos. And as I always say, please join this group if you want to subscribe to this group. And you can make any comment, and I will do my best to be able to respond. God bless you all, and thank you very much. See you next time.